Okay, so in this video, we're going to be covering Insomnia REST client. For most developers, a REST client is one of the tools that you have in your tool belt. So what they basically are is a shortcut for testing and debugging APIs. Although there's several popular clients, Insomnia is one of the best ones out there in terms of features and the amount of versatility it has. So if you do not have it installed already, you can go to this site right here, insomnia.rest. And then this is cross-platform. It's an Electron application, which means it's run using JavaScript in a Chromium web browser as a standalone application. So whether you're on Mac, Windows, or Linux, there's a build that you can install and run. So we're going to start off by making just general simple HTTP requests. And for that, we're going to be using this website, httpbin.org. This is just a request and response service. So let's go ahead and get started. So to set up a new request, as it says right here, you can just hit Command N, Command or Control N, Control on Windows. Or we can just come here to this drop down and then select New Request. And we'll just name this HTTP bin get. And then it's already selected to get by default. We can select the different methods here. And then we'll just go ahead and create. So the first thing we can do is type in the URL. And then once we do that, we can just click the send button. And what httpbin.org does is that it will send us a JSON response. Basically, any data that you post to them, they'll post it right back to you. For example, we could just apply a get parameter. So we'll just say question mark get equals or test equals true. And then if we send that, so in our arguments, these are the query parameters that we put in here. Test equals true, and we get that posted back to us in an args object. However, this is not the best way to add query parameters, although it does work. A better way would be to click on this query tab and then apply the keys and values here. And if we resend, it's going to be equivalent to what we just had inside the URL, except we can add another param, say user Mike, and then the good thing about setting it up this way is we can toggle these on and off. So if we just want to leave a parameter off and then send the request, we can do so, and then it's still in the system here. So we can toggle these on and off as we see fit. And then it's going to give you this URL preview anyway, even though we had. So the only thing that's worth putting in that I would recommend typing in this field up here would just be the base URL, and then any extra parameters. It's going to give it to you in the URL preview also. Posting is also very easy. I'm going to go ahead and create a new request, and we'll call this HTTP bin post, and then we'll call this form data. And then we will select post from the dropdown. And then let's just go ahead and create. And I'm going to go back to here, copy the root URL, httpbin.org. In fact, we could put a /post. And the way this works, I didn't cover this. We can, if we come to the site here, it gives us basically all the methods that we can post. So post request is going to go to /post. So if we return to our REST client, if we come down here to body, we can apply a multiport form. So we want to post this form data. Now in here we can add, so this is going to be similar to an HTML form in which you have different input elements. And then when you go to submit the form, it's going to send a post request. This is similar to something like that. So I'm just going to add a couple here. Username, it's called Joe. We'll add one more. Email. We'll just give it a fake email address. Then once we have that in, we can just hit send. And similar to the GET requests, httpbin.org is going to post the same data back to us. So instead of being in the args object, that's for query params, what we're going to get back is a form object. So that way we know it's, so httpbin.org is treating it separately. So it's submitting as form data. And then we could also come in here. And so inside that header info, we can see that what we're posting to is an Nginx server, that we're posting the content type being returned is application JSON. So we're getting a JSON object back. So it does give us some of this information. And notice also that the user agent, Insomnia, is basically giving us a default user agent of Insomnia REST client. So what we can do is we can come into header and then set that to Mozilla, for example. So we can override any of these default settings. So if we were to send that, so our user agent is overridden. So we have full control over what headers we actually send, which is a good feature. So another handy feature is some of the requests that we create in a collection of requests within a single workspace. A lot of them are going to have a lot of similarities. So what we can do in this example is click the down arrow next to our request and then select the duplicate option. What it does by default is it gives it the same name except copy. So this one's going to be a little bit different. We're going to call this one, we'll do a JSON payload. So this one is going to be similar to an AJAX request. So let's just go ahead and select JSON. And we're going to hit OK. So when we switch these, the data that we had saved in the multipart form data, those are basically gone. So it basically clears it out every time you switch this. So that's one important thing to keep in mind. So notice right off the bat, we've got an error here. So this has a built-in JSON validator. So if I just put in a curly brace, so an empty object is technically valid JSON. So that'll clear the error by itself. And then also, let's go put our same parameters in. And then once again, if we were to make a mistake, like leave a comma out, we're going to get an error. So this is very useful for copying some JSON data in, make sure it's valid before we actually send a request. I'm going to go ahead and put the comma back in. And then, so this is going to post the data as a single JSON object. And notice that before, the data that got posted back to us was in the form object. However, we're not posting it as a standard HTML form. We're just posting a single data object. So it's going to give us the information back in a data object response. Notice one thing it does is it's putting in our line breaks and tabs also. So that's one thing to keep in mind. If you can, it's probably better to just minify this. So if we were to completely take out all the line breaks and tabs and post it again, that generally fixes it. The only backslashes are to escape the double quotes. But yeah, if you could post it like this, it's actually better. Okay, another really important feature that Insomnia REST client has, it has the ability to parse and filter the data that is posted back to us. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new request, Command or Control N on Windows. And let's just call this World Bank. We'll go ahead and create. I'm going to go ahead and enter the URL. This is basically going to give us a list of countries from the World Bank website. So by default, if we were to just send this, it's going to okay, apparently we have to have the format equals JSON. I thought by default it would just give you XML data, but you have to double check that. So api.worldbank.org/countries with a get parameter of format equals JSON. I just put in the URL up here. We could have also just stuck it in here, and then I can delete it from the URL. This is similar to just a basic GET request. It's going to give us the same information back. So the key thing to keep in mind is this section down here. What you see in here is a placeholder. It says $.store.books *.author, and then so this is called JSON Path. And then if we come to the JSON Path reference, there's a good one right here. I'll put the link to this in the description along with all the other links that I referenced throughout the video. So this allows us to basically use JSON path expressions. We can filter the data that's coming back to us. So in any API that's given us a ton of data back, and let's say you wanted just a certain type of thing from it, and it's too much data to just digest, this is where this handy feature really comes into play. Okay, so notice that the data that's coming back is in the form of an array. So it's basically an array that contains two items. The first item is this metadata object. The second item is another array that is our list of countries. So what I could do here is enter dollars with a 0. And it's going to give us that first item in the array, which is this metadata object. So it looks like when we get this list of countries, there's a total of 304 records, but on each page, there's only 50. So every API call we make is only going to return 50 results. And keep in mind with JSON path, the $ is basically the root element. So all of the expressions that we're going to be demoing here are going to start with $. So dollars, and then we want the dollars represents the original array, and then 0 is the index, which returns us the first item in the array, which was this object here. So since the list of countries was the second object in the array, actually it's a nested list or nested array. If we put in a 1, we're just going to get the array of countries. And then we could break that down even further if we want just the first item. We can do that. So $1 was the list of countries with another bracket with a 0. That's going to be the first item in the index. So here, in this case, it's Aruba, the country of Aruba. JSON path also allows us to put in a range, and all we need is a colon, and that'll give us a range within those indexes. So if we have a 3, we're going to get the first 3 countries. So this could be any number. We could put in 5, and then that'll give us 5, and so on. So that's using the colon operator. There's also a union operator. So if we want just the first and third, so that's by index, so 0, 2. That's going to give us Aruba, and then looks like Africa, which is a region. Okay, so we know from the metadata that we saw earlier that there's 50 items, or 50 in the list of countries, 50 countries. Sometimes we're going to be calling APIs. We're not going to know how many is in the list, but let's say we want to get the very last item anyway. So I'm going to put the square brackets back in, and then we can also use the parentheses. So the parentheses just means an expression, and then the @ symbol will mean the current element being the list of countries. And then we could use the length property since we're using an expression. And then if we subtract 1 from the length, so that'll give us an index of 49, which is the last country in the list of a 0-based index containing 50 items in the list. And that's going to give us China. Now, as a sanity check, we can go ahead and pull out our expression at .length -1. And then we'll just scroll down to the very bottom, and then we can see that yes, China is the last item in the array. So using the expressions with the @ symbol allows us to use different JavaScript-like properties, and that's a very handy feature if we want to filter down to a certain thing. So in this next example, we can see that every country that's listed is basically an object. So it's going to have a bunch of different properties. Let's say that all we wanted was the name of each country. So we can certainly do that. So remember $1 is the second item in the original list, which is the list of countries. So we can say we want all of them. So .* means all. And then say we only want the name property. And then that will just give us the name of each country. Now, as we scroll down this list, we can see that not every object in the list is actually a country. We have different regions, like we have East Asia and Pacific. We have Europe and Central Asia. So let's say that all we wanted was countries, and then if it was not a country, we want to just skip that one. We can certainly do that also. So I'm going to go ahead and clear everything except for dollars with an index of 1 being the list of countries. I'm going to go ahead and add a set of brackets. And another thing with expressions, we can use the question operator and then our parentheses. So what this will do is if this value in here returns true, then it passes the filter test. But before I do that, I'm going to cut this really quick. Now we can see that all of these have a capital city. So let's come down to our first region. Okay, so if we come down, so we found our first region, that's East Asia and Pacific. That's the first one, I believe, in the list. You'll notice that the capital city is just an empty string. So what we can do is we can use the capital city property to, inside of our filter, we can say if there's no capital city or if it's null or empty, then we'll just actually test for an empty string. So if it's an empty string, then filter it out. So returning to our list, we need our square brackets, question mark, and then our parentheses for our expression. So this has to evaluate to true to be passed the filter test. And we're going to use at. Remember, at means the current element. We want dot capital city. And we'll say does not equal, so bang equals, and then we'll just say empty string. And now that should have filtered those out, and we're still getting the full list. So we need to say dot name for just the name property. And then, yeah, so now we should just have nothing but countries in our list. All the regions should be filtered out. Okay, so in this next part, we're going to be covering how to use variables within Insomnia REST client. So within a single workspace being basically all your collection of requests that are within your left column. You could set up multiple workspaces and switch from one to the other, but we can use variables within these. The reason why you'd want to do this is, within a single workspace, a lot of those APIs, they might have certain commonalities, things that are related to each other. They might have the same base URL. They might have the same API key. There's a whole bunch of different things that they could share in common. So instead of having to configure this every single time, it'd be nice just to have some environment variables. So for this section, what I'm going to be doing is pulling data from the Fred database. This is basically interest rate history data. And for this, you need to register and grab an API key. So you can come to fred.stlouisfed.org and then click register up here. And then you can get your own API key. And there's a whole bunch of different databases that are available regarding economic research. So for the purposes of this, I'm going to set up a new request. And we'll just call this one Fred 30-year mortgage. Okay, so what I've done is entered a URL, api.stlouisfed.org, and this is the Fred series / observations, and then we have a get parameter for the API key. So if I typed in everything correctly, we should see some data. Okay, so it looks like I get everything typed in here correctly. So what I've done is put in a URL. Our base URL is going to be api.stlouisfed.org/fred/series/observations. And then we have an API key, a series ID. These are all required parameters. In order to get JSON, we have to put the file type of JSON. So if I were to toggle this off, I think it's going to give me XML data, which it does. So we want to work with JSON, so I'll turn that back on. Now we're going to create another similar one, and then so we're going to duplicate, and then we're going to call this one the 15-year mortgage. So I think everything here is going to change except for, everything's going to remain the same except for one or two parameters. So if I put in 15 and then 15, okay, and then we get a list of results back. The thing to keep in mind is if we keep adding API calls that are very similar, it's going to be very cumbersome. And then let's say our API key, we have to change it for some reason. So we would have to go back to every single item in the list to change our API key. But there is a much better way. We can use environment variables. So I click the, so we have no environment set up, but we can either activate a local environment and then switch between environments, or we can just have a single global environment. So this is going to be available, this global environment is going to be available throughout our entire workspace, no matter what. So this is what we're going to use. So and it's just a simple JSON object. So we can set up a base URL. So I'm going to paste in the base URL, and then we're going to add one more variable. I'm going to X out of here, then come back, copy the API key, return to our environment. We can hit Command or Control E to access this as a shortcut. So call this API_key. Okay, so we have that, both of those items in there. So if we return to our 30-year mortgage, so our base URL is basically this whole URL right here. So I'm going to just type in the variable. And then it does have autocomplete, which is very nice. So you don't have to make it easier to remember in your variables. And then we're going to put an API key. So notice you can use these pretty much everywhere. You can use them in the URL field. You can use them in the query parameters. If you had some custom headers you were sending, you can use them there. So, I mean, this is very versatile, and it's supported pretty much throughout all the features that Insomnia gives to you. So we can come over here and then put in base URL here also. And then API key. So both of these are in sync now. They're using variables for the API key and the base URL. So if we were to run this again, we should just get the exact same result. And then if we come over here, get the same result again. So this is one way to greatly enhance or make yourself more efficient while using a REST client. And the one final thing I wanted to cover was exporting requests and generating code. So for that, I'm going to come back over here to this one right here, since we're actually posting data. And then what I can do is just right click anywhere in here and then copy as curl. And then if I were to just paste that in here, you see we have a full curl command. Now curl's pretty straightforward when you're using just a simple GET request, but if you're posting data, all this syntax is very hard to remember. So it's really nice that Insomnia REST client can just give this to you, so you can just use this wherever you want to use it. I'm going to go ahead and return to the client. So notice there were a couple of other options. Another thing we can do is we could go to this generate code option, and then so curl is what we just went over. However, there's a whole bunch of different programming languages in here. So for example, I can select Python, and then let's say you're using so it uses the most common conventions. So let's say we have requests. Requests is a really popular library, and we're using that. So we can just select that, and then it basically sets everything up for you. And then all you have to do is copy this in your Python script. And many other languages are supported, like if you're using JavaScript, for example. Now this is the old traditional XML HTTP request. If you're using jQuery, which is much simpler, they'll give you the jQuery convention as well. Okay, so we have a collection of requests that we have here, and let's say we want to either share these, or maybe we have a desktop or a work computer and then a personal laptop or something like that, and we want to save this in our Dropbox folder. So we have this available, this specific workspace available in multiple locations. So what we can do is we can come up here, and then we can go to this import export option. And then let's come down here to export data, and then we want current workspace. Now there's a couple different formats. So Insomnia, they have their own format. It is a JSON document, and it's pretty easy to read and pretty straightforward. And then you also have as an option the HAR HTTP archive format. So that's pretty standard. Things like Chrome, Google Chrome, and other applications support this format as well. Well, for this demo, I'm going to use Insomnia. And then hit done, and then it's going to give us an option to save this somewhere. So I'm going to go ahead and save this to my desktop and hit export. So we save that to the desktop. Okay, so we have this open. This is our document. It's been saved, and then we can always re-import this. So it's very easy to read. So here's our stlouisfed.org API, for example. So they're all saved, and then when we either switch machines or we share this with somebody else, we can just come right back here to import, export, import data, and then import from file. And then we'll have our workspace exactly as how we left it when we exported the document. So in this video, we've covered some of the best features regarding Insomnia REST client. And although there's other similar REST clients that have a lot of these same features, this is the one that I use and find the most helpful. And it's got a lot of great features, from variables to filtering data to importing and exporting workspaces. Thank you for watching.